Okay, students, welcome back. We are moving on now to chapter 3, human development, or if human development is not chapter 3 in your textbook, then go to whatever chapter is human development. But we are moving on to human development specifically from womb to tomb. That is, from the time that you are not only born, but conceived to the time of your death. So, what is developmental psychology? It is what we are. It is that period that teaches us reality. We learn reality. It doesn't come naturally. We have to learn it. And once you learn it, once all of the specifics, once all of the dimensions and parameters of reality are in your brain and your memories, for which go for as long as you have lived, uh, those memories and the way that you receive those persist. That becomes what you know, what you see, your personality, everything. But it comes from our development, and our development includes our genes, that is, nature, and our environment, every single second of it, nurture. So, what is developmental psychology? It's a study of progressive changes in behavior and abilities, and it involves every stage of life, again, from womb to tomb. Now, developmental psychology and the people who have all of the scientists and people who have worked on developmental psychology over the decades have attempted to put it in stages. And we really know that there's really not so much of a stage. Like one day you're an adolescent, and the next day you're an adult, or one day you're a child and the next day you're an adolescent. No, it doesn't work like that. So, oops, I just pushed a button I didn't want to push. Let me go back to where we were. So, it is shaped by a continuous interaction, continuous, and I mean continuous, microsecond to microsecond interaction between heredity, nature, and your environment. Nurture, and your environment includes everything at any given time. The temperature of the room is part of your environment. The people you're with is part of your environment. The noises, the smells, the proximity of the walls, whether you're inside or outside, everything is your environment. Even your internal state is part of your environment. Okay, let's talk about heredity, the so-called nature part of us. Heredity comes from a genetic transmission via genes of physical and psychological characteristics from parents. Now, and you heard me, I said not only physical, but also psychological characteristics. DNA, you've all heard of that. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is a molecular structure shaped like a double helix. Helix is a spring, looks like a little spring, and there's two little springs that are superimposed over one another. That contains all of the coded information to build you. It is a spectacularly complex process that contains the blueprint, the code, for you to build you. In that, it is organized into 46 segments of DNA. 23 of those segments come from your mother, and 23 come from your father. So the small strands of DNA that carry heredity information are in fact these genes. A so-called dominant gene is a gene feature that appears almost each time if the gene is present. And a recessive gene is a gene that the feature will appear only if it's paired with another recessive gene. So let's say that uh, your mother has blue eyes, but recessive brown eyes, and your father also has blue eyes but recessive brown eyes, and you may very well then uh, have brown eyes because those two recessive genes are may be expressed. Now, polygenic traits are personal traits or physical properties that are influenced by a whole bunch of genes working in combination. And we find that many of these of psychological characteristics, not only good things but bad things, not only things that benefit, psychological characteristics that benefit, but also psychological characteristics that are uh, disorders or problematic behavior that may not necessarily translate into a disorder per se, but combinations of genes work to create this, not just a single gene. And a lot of people believe that just a single gene does this or a single gene does that, but that's not true. For example, take alcoholism. Alcoholism to a lot is genetically transmitted, but it doesn't necessarily have to express itself in the individual. There's simply a predilection there based upon a combination of many genes, and if those become activated, let's say through the environment, then it will express themselves. But many psychological disorders are based upon polygenic traits. Physical growth and development of the body, the brain, the nervous system, that's all part of maturation and development. We will study the sequence in which genetic instructions influence developing body and mind. Now, this occurs naturally for the 9 months during gestation, during development, but then it continues to occur after we're born. And not only that, but it also now then interacts more and more and more with the environment. Uh, we'll discuss readiness as well, the ability of children to rapidly learn. So readiness could very well be both an interaction between nature and nurture. It addresses the ability of children to walk or toilet training. And again, this is limited by maturation. It is not something that can be imposed or forced upon a child. Sometimes parents make the error of attempting to force toilet training on children, and especially if there's punishment and scolding involved, and this really creates some problems for the older individual. The nurture part of it is the sum of all the external conditions that affect a person, especially the effects of learning. So looking at the slide here, we see nature's heredity, genetic predisposition, inborn abilities, and traits. Nurture, environment, what we are taught to do, and this nurture molds or forms pathways or grooves for genetic tendencies. So let's start at the beginning. Prenatal environmental influences. We can have congenital problems. It's a problem or defect that occurs during prenatal development, or in other words, a birth defect. We can have genetic disorders. They're caused by inherited characteristics, for example, cystic fibrosis. Anything capable of directly causing birth defects is called a teratogen. A teratogen, anything capable of directly causing birth defects, narcotics, radiation, cigarette smoke, lead, cocaine, alcohol, asbestos, any of these things that are in the environment can cause and do cause birth defects. I'll mention here one fairly common, unfortunately, birth defect is fetal alcohol syndrome, and it's obviously caused by repeated heavy alcohol consumption during pregnancy, as you can see here, and from the image as well. Uh, 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 Fetal alcohol syndrome infants have a low birth weight and small head. They have behavioral and mental handicaps as well, facial malformations, and what have you. There are particular periods during gestation, during development, that are particularly sensitive. Or, in other words, your body is being built by all of the interactions between DNA and the protein tissues that it affects, that at times there are very sensitive periods, or in other words, during a certain developmental phase, that there may be a certain sensitivity to other molecules and possibly teratogens that would not be sensitive to at any other time. So what is a sensitive period? It is a period of increased sensitivity to environmental influences, and it's also a time when certain events must occur for normal development to take place. So during a sensitive period, you can have either a period in which certain tissues and part of the development is particularly sensitive to environmental influences, and it is also a time when certain development must also take place. Certain tissues must also be built. So when we talk about environmental influences, we're talking about not only deprivation, we're also talking about enrichment, both. Deprivation is the lack of normal stimulation and nutrition and comfort and love as well. Enrichment is an environment that is deliberately made more complex. That's a good thing. And intellectually stimulating and emotionally supportive. So we want to enrich the newborn's environment and the child's environment going forward with as much stimulating visual and auditory information as possible. So we can enrich a child's environment simply by being responsive and providing a lot of stimulating play materials. But even when the child is just in the crib, laying there, looking up, not just don't let them look up at the bare ceiling, but in fact, some of those fuzzy things that we put in there may not be that optimally stimulating as well, because at this stage of the game, we're learning the difference between figure ground, the different what's a line, what's a straight edge versus a curved edge, what's the basic features of a face. So some of the designs that one might put in the infant's crib or have above the infant to look at, there are some designs out there that are more optimal than some of the other cutesy stuff that's people put in their children's cribs. The interplay of heredity and environment. Now, this is obviously contained in not only from the hereditary aspects of the individual, of the child, and that is just how much can the child take in, but also the environment as well. How much is available in the environment? It's basically the same thing that I've been saying for the past 5 minutes, is that the child's environment needs to provide as much sensory information, and we'll talk about all the senses later, in another lecture. But the developmental level is an individual's current state of physical, emotional, and intellectual development. And again, influenced by heredity and environment and the person's own behavior, which also comes into play and becomes an essential part of this interaction as well. So let's talk about an example of developmental level, and that's called temperament. Infant temperament is an important ingredient toward development and something important to look at in early development. There are 4 different types, and of course, there's a lot of carryover and overlap here, but basically, easy children comprises about 40% of newborns, of infants. They are essentially relaxed and agreeable. Difficult children, 10% are moody, intense, easily angered. Slow to warm up children, about 15%, restrained, unexpressive, shy. The remaining children really don't fit into any specific kind of category. An easy child encourages positive parenting. A difficult child may make parents more negative, so we need to watch out for that because the child being negative doesn't necessarily mean that the child doesn't like you or wants to give you a bad time. It is simply the child's nature, and we need to love that nature and not just simply and not simply react to the child's output. Parental reactions, in turn, can make an easy child easier or a difficult child more difficult. This is basically what I just said. Alternately, a committed parenting can counteract, with the child's temperament and producing positive growth. Or in other words, a difficult child can be turned around. And this isn't through lots of homework. This is basically on you. Neonates or newborns are very responsive at birth with sensory capacities that rapidly mature. They're also born with a number of very basic reflexes, and most of these reflexes disappear after a while, but they're born with specific reflexes. Now, what is a reflex? A reflex is something that causes an automatic motor response. They come from nature, not nurture. So a reflex is complete nature only. What are some of these reflexes? There's the grasping reflex. So if an object is placed in the neonate's palm, she'll grasp it automatically. There's the rooting reflex. If we lightly touch the infant's cheek, the infant will turn toward the object and attempt to nurse. So this helps the infant find the bottle or breast. There is the sucking reflex. So we touch an object or a nipple to the infant's mouth, and she'll make rhythmic sucking movements. Then there's another reflex. You may not have heard of this before, but it's called the Moro reflex. So if the baby's position is suddenly changed, or if he's startled by a loud noise, he'll make a hugging motion. And you can see that. That's on the right side of the graphic here. That's called a Moro reflex. As we proceed through the weeks and the months, we have increased muscular control, and it occurs in patterns. So the rate of maturation is variable, but the order of maturation is almost always universal. So the order is, like I just said, this pretty much comes in sequence. But now how the speed at which that order proceeds, or when it first starts, that's an individual process. So these terms here, so cephalocaudal, from head to toe. Cephalocaudal, from head to toe. And proximodistal means from the center of the body to the extremities, so from the center outward. Cephalocaudal, head to toe, and proximodistal, center outward. Newborns are mimics, and they rapidly learn the world from birth as they explore and try to make sense of their surroundings. I'm not sure if making sense of it is that's more metaphorical, because the infant, the newborn and infants really don't have a lot of insight into things at this point. But what they are doing, what a child is doing, is learning what things feel like, touch, look like, sound like, perhaps, smell like, maybe even in some cases, unfortunately, even taste like. Their senses develop very, very rapidly. Our early social development is rooted in emotional attachment to our primary caregivers and our need for physical contact. There's a lot of research done primarily with lower primates. We're primates ourselves, to looking at the relationship between physical contact and healthy functioning. What is emotional attachment? It is a close emotional bond, whatever that is, and we'll talk about just what things mean empirically. That is, how do we measure things? How do we really know what that is other than just saying a word? What is an emotional bond that infants have form with parents, caregivers, or others? The term contact comfort, it means there's a pleasant and reassuring feeling babies get from touching something warm and soft, especially their mother. So early social development comes from an idea called attachment. And attachment is an ongoing area in psychology and human development. We'll talk a lot about attachment, but a sure sign, a real good sign of emotional attachment is what's called separation anxiety, and that's when the child shows signs of fear when left alone or is with a stranger, and it usually starts at around 8 to 12 months. So at some point, the child has learned by 8 to 12 months that if the primary caregiver leaves the child either alone or with a stranger, or with a stranger, that fear insets, separation anxiety insets. Now, separation anxiety disorder, that is the point at which it becomes abnormal, difficult for the child to develop or function, is when we have severe and prolonged distress displayed by children, some children, when separated from the parent or caregiver. You may have seen this behavior in your own life. This term down here called affectional needs, or emotional needs for love and affection. And often you'll hear psychologists use the term affect. Affect is, in fact, the expression of emotion. Attachment quality. Now, there is a researcher, her name is Ainsworth, and she did considerable research in this area of attachment, and you see there the YouTube address there on the page. I would suggest you go there and check that out as well. So we have different types of attachment qualities. So a secure attachment is stable and a positive emotional bond. What Ainsworth called Insecure avoidant is an anxious emotional bond with a tendency to avoid reunion with the parent or caregiver. An insecure ambivalent attachment is an anxious emotional bond, desire to be with the parent or caregiver, and some resistance to being reunited with the mother. So now there's even an insecure and even ambivalent condition where the child doesn't even show some resistance to being reunited with the mother. These early attachment qualities can have very long-lasting effects, and there's effects that we don't remember. You're just simply not going to remember that because people talk about looking for early memories in their childhood, but in fact, we don't have the memory, we don't have the language, we don't have the perceptual ability or wherewithal to remember uh, uh, these types of incidences, especially more complex ones, before we're 1 year old, and many times before we're even 2 or 3. But as you can see here on the pie graph, the secure positive emotional bond, we see that about 60% of the time, disorganized 15%, avoidant 15%, and ambivalent 10. So, what are the styles? What are the styles of parenting? This is something that you're going to run into, especially if you continue in psychology, and it's there's a lot of research in this area, and I've done a lot in this particular area myself. But there are identifiable patterns of parental caretaking and interaction with children. You can see these patterns. Now, it's not all of one. They are all intermingled. But so when we talk about a pattern or a style, it is generally that which is expressed more. It's the majority of the parental interaction. Authoritarian, it's punitive, it's strict. There's an expectation of obedience. There's no negotiation. Authoritative, one negotiates with the child to a degree. There's setting boundaries. One is supportive. There's balance. So you have discipline, but you also have support as well. In authoritative parenting, the parent is assertive, not aggressive or punishing. Uninvolved, also called neglectful parenting, a lack of support, few demands, no controls. Permissive parenting, and the child is in charge. The child is indulged. There's no direction. The child is spoiled. If you're looking at Harry Potter, look at Harry Potter's cousin, the kid that he grew up with in the first movie, and you'll see permissive parents and an overindulged child, whereas Harry is raised highly authoritarianly. So, mothers and fathers, what kind of influence do they exert? The maternal influence is the sum of all of the effects a mother has on her child, and of course, the paternal influence is the sum of all the effects that the father has on his child. Let's talk about some very general ethnic parenting styles. African American parenting styles seem to emphasize loyalty, interdependence, security, positive identity, persistence. Parents stress obedience, respect for elders. Hispanic, very generally, again, emphasize strict standards of discipline, centrality of the family, and cooperation. Asian American families, we see interdependence among individuals, a need to set aside one's own goals for the greater goods, and parents stress respect and self-discipline in older children. In Arab American families, politeness, conformity, parents demand obedience and respect. Moving into language development, this is also very closely tied to maturation. Some of the first language development we get is cooing. Now, what is cooing? The child just isn't making noises to entertain herself or you. This is the beginning of talking and understanding. So, cooing is a repetition of vowel sounds. The repetition of vowel sounds, and it starts at around 6 to 8 weeks. Babbling is a repetition of meaningless language sounds like ba 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 ba. And that's usually consonants, B, D, M, G. That starts at about 7 months. The single word stage, so the child says one word at a time, starts at about the 2nd year. So-called telegraphic speech is 2-word sentences that communicate a single idea, like want cookie. After 2, language development does accelerate very, very quickly. Also, if it's not obvious to you, early learning shapes language development. So parents and babies both come to share share systems of signals. And that may very well include touching, vocalizing, gazing, smiling. And this allows a nonverbal interaction and turn-taking between parent and the child. So this is really the child also learns essentially body language, the unspoken word. What you see before you is the man before you. His name is Jean Piaget. He's French. He was and remains one of the main theorists in human development. Piaget believed that children pass through a set of 4 stages. And again, remember now, we're still on this idea of stages. But there's never any abrupt change. There's lots of overlap. So he believed in stages. He's one of the stage theorists, and we'll talk about others. And he believed also that intellect grows through what he called assimilation and accommodation. So what is assimilation? So an illustration of assimilation. When a child first sees a Dalmatian dog, the child will interpret this information based upon his or her existing mental frameworks and will label it doggy. So what is it? It's an application of existing mental patterns to new situations. So the new situation is assimilated to the existing mental scheme. Now, accommodation takes existing ideas and change to fit new requirements. So, for example, now the child sees a cow for the first time, and the child assimilates it to her schema of doggy as a 4-legged animal. But now the mother tells her that that's a cow. So she'll accommodate this new information and will refer to the animal as a cow and not a doggy. So at this point now the child learns that not all 4-legged animals are doggies. So existing ideas are changed to fit new requirements, and mental schemes are changed. So Piaget has four developmental stages, and the first of those stages, the very basic first of those stages, is called the sensory motor stage, going from 0 to 2 years. And in that sensory input, motor responses become increasingly more coordinated, and most of our intellectual development is nonverbal. But it's a tremendous amount of intellectual development because we learn the world around us, and we learn the separation between self and the world around us. At this point, infants can't create internal mental representations. They lack what's called object permanence. So object permanence is a concept that objects still exist when they're out of sight. That's why peekaboo. They laugh at peekaboo, and you hide your eyes, your face behind your hands. Your face is no longer there to the infant without object permanence. So children begin to develop mental images, but can't transform them. And this is in what's called the pre-operational stage, 2 to 7 years. What is a transformation? It's mentally changing the shape or form of a mental image. And again, children younger than 6 or 7 can't do this. They begin to use language and think symbolically, but their thinking is still intuitive and egocentric. So also within pre-operational thinking, within this period of time, we still make little use of reasoning or logic. It's almost all intuition. And by egocentric, the child is unable to accommodate viewpoints of others. There's no empathy there. Thoughts are self-centered. Moving then from this pre-operational stage to the concrete operational stage, children are now becoming able to carry out mental operations like reversibility. Now remember, now this goes from ages 7 to 11, and children are also becoming more aware to use concepts of time, space, volume, and number, but in ways that remain simplified and concrete, not abstract. So, for example, concrete operations during this period of time and reversibility. During this period of time, children have a problem with the conservation of mass, weight, volume. The volume of matter remains unchanged even when the shape or appearance of the object changes. Reversibility is are relationships involving equality or identity and whether or not they can be reversed. Or in other words, if A equals B, then B equals A. The concrete operational child can watch an object change shape and mentally reverse that change to see that mass, weight, or volume remains unchanged. So formal operational stage now. Now we're moving past the concrete operational stage into the formal operational stage. Thinking now includes abstract and hypothetical ideas. Hypothetical ideas means what if? What if? Abstract principles like concepts and examples removed from specific examples in concrete situations. And hypothetical possibilities, suppositions, guesses, or projections. Now, Lev Vygotsky's sociocultural theory is an area that has really taken root in the past 20 years or so, even though he himself died in 1934. He had a relatively short life. He only lived to be 38. But within his theoretical framework, children's cognitive development is heavily influenced by sociocultural factors. Or in other words, we start in a center of a sphere that is self and home and slowly move outward in concentric spheres. Children's thinking develops through dialogues with more capable people. He had what's called the zone of proximal development. So the range of tasks children cannot yet master alone, even though they're close to having the necessary mental skills. They need guidance from a skilled partner in order to complete the task, and then they move out and out further through example and rehearsal. So the so-called zone of proximal development, you can see that and see how that works in the graphic. Scaffolding. Now, a scaffold, we put around a house or a building or something, and it helps us to work easily around the structure at more difficult heights until the structure can stand on its own. Well, basically, that's the same idea here. Scaffolding, adults help children learn how to think through this process of scaffolding or supporting attempts to solve a problem or discover principles. It has to be and must be responsive to a child's needs. So you can see the process below in the intersecting circles that I have there in helping the child to develop and scaffolding. This is essentially pedagogy. This is really how any new skill is taught and learned through very small steps, baby steps. As we move into adolescence and emerging adulthood, first of all, let me explain that adolescence is a culturally defined period between childhood and adulthood. It's culturally defined. It doesn't necessarily exist everywhere, and in fact, 200 years ago, 300 didn't exist at all. Puberty is associated with the emotional changes during adolescence that promote rapid physical growth and sexual maturity. Identity, which is also an important part of adolescence. Identity formation is a key task, something that is very important to occur in adolescence. Sometimes it doesn't, so we run into difficulty and personality problems there as well. And the adolescent is looking at an emerging adulthood, a socially tolerated period of extended adolescence. There is a theorist, his name was Lawrence Kohlberg, and he wrote about moral development. Now, how does that happen? I mean, moral development, or in other words, our thinking about what is right and wrong. Not as simple as it sounds, but it is a period, it's also starting in childhood, continues into adulthood, during which we acquire our values and beliefs, thinking, guide to responsible behavior. But he was also a stage theorist, much like Freud, and we're going to talk also about Erik Erikson here. We just talked about Piaget. So what are Kohlberg's three levels or three stages of moral development? First, there's the pre-moral stage. That's moral reasoning, thinking based upon consequences of one's actions. Or another, if I do that, I'll be punished. If I do that, I'll be rewarded. And there's two stages in pre-moral development. Within that level, stage one is just making moral decisions strictly on the basis of self-interest. And stage two is recognizing that others have needs, but make satisfaction of one's own needs a higher priority. Then we move into the so-called conventional level. So stage three is the good boy, good girl stage, where we make decisions based on what will please others. And we're concerned more about maintaining, that is, about maintaining interpersonal relationships. Stage four, the law and order stage, where we look to society as a whole for guidelines about behavior. Then the principles level, recognize that rules are social agreements that can be changed when necessary. And finally, adhere to a small number of abstract principles that transcend specific concrete rules and answer to an inner conscience, so to speak. I mentioned Erik Erikson, and we're going to talk about him right now. He has 8 developmental stages of human development, of going from womb to tomb again, going from birth all the way to death. And these stages are fairly well documented, although there's a considerable overlap between all of them, and they sometimes don't necessarily go in that order. Nor is there any necessity in any stage to complete it before moving on to the next. So the level of incompletion of one stage before you move on, one moves on to the next stage, can be problematic in development as well. So here are Erikson's eight stages, and many times they're referred to not only by number, but also by what it's called. Stage 1, trust versus mistrust. Stage 2, autonomy versus shame and doubt. Stage 3, initiative versus guilt. Stage 4, industry versus inferiority. Stage 5, identity versus confusion. Stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. Stage 7, generativity versus self absorption. And stage 8, integrity versus despair. So in all of that, we're looking at the first year of life all the way to late adulthood. And we see that some of the problems that result from an incomplete previous stage, or the level of incompleteness, can in fact lead to some of the negative consequences of this incomplete stage, like for the infant, just basic mistrust if that stage isn't really satisfied. Autonomy can lead to, a lack of autonomy can lead to shame and doubt and so on. So let's talk about stage 2, autonomy versus shame and doubt. Doing things for themselves is autonomy. What can throw a monkey wrench into the development of this stage, going from age 1 to age 3, are overprotective or ridiculing parents. And this causes children to doubt their abilities. And overprotective, I mean the parent who is constantly hovering over the child, and just the slightest fall or any disturbance, the parent runs over to the child. Are you okay? Are you okay? You need to give the child some room to learn. Gerontology is the study of aging. Ageism is the discrimination or prejudice based on a person's age. Gerontologists study aging and its effects. Now, one of the obviously we have, as we age, we have compounding physical difficulties. Let's talk about our intellectual abilities as we develop. Fluid abilities, acquiring speed, rapid learning, and this is based on perceptual and motor abilities. They may decrease with age. Fluid abilities. Crystallized abilities, however, those are learned or accumulated knowledge and skills, including vocabulary and some basic facts. Those tend to stay about the same, if not even get a little better. Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, you may have heard of her before. She is her stages of looking at death got generalized into the stages of simply coping with anything that is traumatic. Ross was what we call a thantologist, and that's one who studies the emotional and behavioral reactions to death and dying. So she described 5 basic reactions to death. They occur not necessarily in the following order or experienced by everyone, but generally speaking, you may have heard these as well. They start with denial and isolation, moving to anger and bargaining, then depression, and then acceptance. Now, you can change those to, let's say you walk out to your car and turn it on and it doesn't start. Now, at first it says, oh, no, you keep trying to start it. That's denial. Then you're angry. Well, oh, this is all I need. Then you start bargaining, like, please, just let this be a simple problem so I can get out of here so I can go. To depression, it's not just a simple problem. Now I have to deal with this. To acceptance, okay, now I'm going to deal with it. Here comes AAA or whoever you called, or you call somebody to give you a jump start. But generally, we sort of go through these 5 stages just with any a sudden and unexpected negative circumstance. What is effective parenting? Effective parents foster positive parent-child interactions. They're effective in discipline. They have stable rules of conduct. They're consistent. They don't change from day to day or from reason to reason. And they show mutual respect. So what are some of the types of child discipline? Power, using physical punishment, withdrawal of love, and management techniques like combining praise and recognition, approval, rules, reasoning to encourage desirable behavior. What are some effective communication that is effective or researched to be very effective in child development? Using I messages and not you messages. And what does that do? That avoids power struggles, and it relies on natural consequences and logical consequences. So the I message tells children the effect of their behavior on you. What does that do? That helps the child develop empathy. You messages include threats, name calling, accusing, bossing, criticizing, and lecturing. Avoid it. You know, like you this, you always that. And by the way, there's no such thing as always. It doesn't exist. Stop saying it. So that is the end of our lecture for the day, as you could see here. And I will start the next lecture shortly.